So before we begin talking about this moving forward series about the Seattle Sounders and pretty much finishing off our moving forward series this week by looking at the two finalists in the MLS Cup, unfortunately we have to start with a very sad news, as I heard today that Mateus Almeida's father unfortunately passed away, and it seemed like it is COVID related. That is the reason why his father is passed away, and I want to share all my condolence toward him and also his family, and also the Quakes family have been sharing their condolence and have gave their thoughts and prayer in terms of what Mateus Almeida and his family has to deal with it, because I can't imagine what he is dealing with right now, and especially losing someone of COVID, and that we know this past year COVID has definitely played a big part of our lives, and we had a lot of challenges going through. Well, imagine if you have to go through this, but unfortunately one of your family did pass away from this virus. I think that just makes it even more difficult than before. And again, I want to share my thoughts and prayers and also my condolence towards Mateus Almeida. And there's no doubt that if this actually happened during the season, there'll definitely be a minute of silence that the Quakes will do during their games, and we shall see. Maybe they'll still do that once the season does start, or when the preseason does start for the Quakes in this coming weeks. But that being said, on a more lighter note, let us actually once again talk about the moving forward series of these two MLS Cup finalists, or actually we'll talk about one of them today, and then we'll finish off with the winner of this season and the champion of this season, that is the Columbus Crew, on Thursday. But first we're going to talk about the loser, which is the Seattle Sounders, who finished with a record of 11-6-5 and finished with 39 points. They scored 44 goals this season while allowing 23 goals with a goal differential of plus 20, and they finished second in the Western Conference, which I think this is the fourth year in a row that they finished second in the Western Conference. Like, this is why every time when I do my prediction, I always put Seattle in second in the Western Conference, because I know for sure that they're probably going to finish second, and no matter how they do it, whether it's getting off to a slow start and then just magically had a crazy resurgence in the second half of the season to grab themselves second in the West, or maybe in recent year where they have consistently been pretty good throughout the season to finish second in the West, it's pretty much like death, taxes, and the Seattle Sounders always finish second in the Western Conference by the end of the regular season. Oh, also, by the way, the goal score number, 44 goals, that's actually the third most in the Western Conference. But 23 goals allowed this season for the Sounders is actually the best defensive record in the Western Conference, and only I believe the Philadelphia Union has a better defensive record than the Seattle Sounders this season. And their plus 21 goal differential, pretty much the same story. Best goal differential in the Western Conference, and only the Philadelphia Union has a better goal differential than what the Seattle Sounders did this season. And as I mentioned, they lost in MLS Cup 2020 to the Columbus Crew. Now, MVP of this team, it's no doubt Nico Lodeiro. I mean, I could have easily picked one of the other big three like Jordan Morris or Raul Ruidiaz as the MVP, but at the end of the day, it's got to be Lodeiro. I mean, you talk about a guy that is arguably the best number 10 in the league, and he continued to show why exactly he is, with being in third of the goal scoring chart and once again the top assist leader of this team. And basically, if Lodeiro is not able to be in the starting 11 for the Sounders, the Sounders are going to struggle. That's how much Lodeiro means to their team, as he is really the heart and soul of this Sounders team. And I could even argue, out of the big three of those players that I mentioned for the Sounders, Lodeiro is probably the most important out of those big three that they have. Now, in terms of disappointment, I decided to do a playoff edition of disappointment for the Seattle Sounders, because if I did a regular season kind of disappointment and overall this season, it's kind of hard to choose who actually was a huge disappointment for the Sounders, as everybody seemed to play up to their potential, and there also are a couple of players that actually play even better than what I expected. But I decided to kind of do a playoff edition, because while the Sounders did make it to MLS Cup and they had some great resort to get them to that stage, there were definitely some players that did not perform more. In the case of MLS Cup 2020, yeah, you can pretty much say everybody belonged in the disappointment list list for the Seattle Sounders because basically nobody showed up in the MLS Cup, and they decided to kind of take a day off in the most important game of the season. But overall, in terms of the playoff edition, I'm going to go with Jordan Morris. I mean, besides the fact that, I talk about how the big three in terms of the playoffs, they really kind of struggle besides that game against LAFC and also that 15-minute spell where they were able to create a crazy comeback against Minnesota to win the Western Conference Final and reach MLS Cup. The big three really didn't perform at all, and I think the player that probably definitely did not perform besides that game against LAFC is Jordan Morris. I mean, besides the one goal that he scored in that game, he basically did not contribute in the assist and the goal scoring chart. And while this didn't really kind of hamper his move to potentially go to Europe, you wondered some of those scouts that did see Jordan Morris in Europe, and they think that, well, we know that this kid has a lot of talent, but seeing how in the biggest stage he doesn't seem to perform as well as we expected, maybe that kind of hinders some other big name club that maybe wanted to get Jordan Morris. And maybe if he did perform well in the playoffs, maybe even bigger club like besides Swansea City might even think about trying to get him and maybe even sign him on a loan deal. But overall, he still did get his move to Swansea City, but unfortunately we know what happened in terms of that move, and I'll talk about a little bit later on of how heartbreaking that situation happened to him a couple of weeks ago, or actually not a couple of weeks ago, but just 2 weeks ago. Now, top goal scorer of this team, unsurprisingly, Raul Ruidiaz leads the team with 12 goals, and he's actually finished second behind Diego Rossi in the Golden Boot chart. Then followed by Jordan Morris with 10 goals, with Nico Ladero with 7 goals, and it's unsurprising the big three of the Seattle Sounders is the top 3 in terms of the top goal scoring chart. Then you got Calvin Leerdam with 3 goals, followed by João Paulo, finished with 2 goals to round out the top goal scorer chart. Top assist leader, unsurprisingly, Nico Ladero leads the list with 10 assists, followed by Jordan Morris with 8. João Paulo and Christian Roldan both with 5 assists, followed by Raul Ruidiaz with 4 assists to round up the top assist leader chart. So what went right for the Seattle Sounders? Well, they reach MLS Cup again, and that this is now 4 out of, I believe, the last 5 seasons that they have been able to reach the pinnacle of the MLS season, which, that's got to be absolutely impressive to see how the Sounders are able to make MLS Cup every single year. And you like it or hate it, you cannot not admire how amazing this team has been, not just throughout this last decade, but also in these past couple of years, where I know, with them not winning this year MLS Cup, maybe that kind of hinder in terms of the talk that they might be the greatest dynasty in MLS history, but I have no doubt that this is definitely one of the best dynasties in MLS history, and it's something that we haven't seen a lot of MLS Cup or a lot of MLS team able to reach that many MLS Cup in a short amount of time. I think not since the LA Galaxy back in the early 2010s, or even in the very early days of the league when DC United was pretty much in the MLS Cup every single year, and they won like 3 out of the first 4 MLS Cup and made 4 straight MLS Cup in the first 4 seasons of the league history, that we have not seen that a club reach MLS Cup in a regular kind of appearance. And what makes the Sounders even more impressive than some of those other teams is, unlike how DC United, when they reach MLS Cup, like for their first four season and the first 4 season in the league existed, back then, there was only 10 teams in MLS, and reaching MLS Cup isn't really as big of a task as it is now with more games that you have to reach that point. But also, most importantly, back then it was pretty clear that DC had the best squad in the league, and that the rest of the league and the rest of the team in the early days of MLS just doesn't have the good enough squad to really compete DC United. Whereas nowadays, there's multiple teams that has a very decent squad, and especially in the Western Conference, where I've been saying for the past couple of years, the West is always the strongest conference, and so always have some really good team that is vying for MLS Cup. And yet, somehow, in some way, the Sounders continue to prove that they are the team to beat in the West, no matter what the competition it is, and that just makes it more impressive. And again, like it or not, this is kind of the way it is, and that if they can continue to keep this core or continue this dominance that they've shown in a decade, I don't think they're going to be slow down, and they're always going to be considered an MLS contender every single season, no matter if they lose a bit any big name player, or even this upcoming season, losing Jordan Morris is going to be tough, but nobody is going to bet against the fact that that is going to be a move that's going to take the Seattle Sounders out of the question of being an MLS Cup contender. There's no doubt that this is still going to be one of the strongest teams, even they lose one of their bigger player for this upcoming season. Now, the other thing that went right with this team is that they bounced back after a rough MLS is back tournament, and it seemed like the Sounders saw that MLS is back tournament and saw that was kind of like the first half of the MLS season. And you know how there's this kind of cliche and also in some way kind of a meme saying that the Sounders usually don't show up in the first half of the season, but in the second half of the season they're going to have a crazy resurgence. Well, as I said, they pretend the MLS is back tournament is like the first half of the season, and then when they realize the tournament is over and they realize that, oh yeah, we better step it up because this is the second half of the season, yeah, that's when they really show their true color and show why they were at then the defending MLS Cup champion and really got an incredible run to finish second in the Western Conference. And then the last thing that I want to say that went right for them is that they finished with the best defensive record in the West, as I mentioned. But I want to highlight that because coming into last season, that was one of the weakest link that the Sounders was going to be coming in the upcoming season. Like, there was a lot of people questioning that this back line of the Sounders, and especially some of the big player that could contribute in that MLS Cup run, is no longer with this team. You just have a lot of question of how their back line is going to go. And not only the fact that they once again made an incredible signing by bringing Yeimar, who I think he is one of the best defensive player in the league and probably one of the best acquisition in terms of last offseason, and also getting guys like Shane O'Neill, who he was an outcast at Orlando City, but especially in the playoffs he should look like he turns out to be one of the best defender. And really, I think Orlando City fans are absolutely punching in air themselves in the air, knowing how good he actually turns out with the Sounders, and how for whatever reason he wasn't even anywhere close to being good when he was with Orlando City. And then let's also not to mention about Arriaga, where I remember last season when Arriaga was playing for the Sounders. I know a lot of Sounders fans always frustrated to see Arriaga being one of the players in that center back role because he's a very prone kind of player, and that there was question whether or not if he can basically live up to his potential and fix those mistakes. Oh yeah, he definitely fixed those mistakes, and he become a much better defender and really started to live up to the expectation that we know that he could definitely be kind of a future Chad Marshall kind of type of players for the Seattle Sounders team. So yeah, the back line, last off season and coming into last season, we thought that was going to be the weakest link, and it turns out at the end of the season, not only it wasn't the weakest link, but they actually finished with the best defensive record in the Western Conference. So we went wrong for this Sounders team. Well, as I mentioned, the big three, they basically went AWOL during the playoffs, and as I mentioned, we've got like Ruidíaz, Ladera, and Morris, besides that one good game that they had against LAFC and that short 15-minute spell that they had against Minnesota in the conference final. They did not show up at any other of the game. Like against FC Dallas, if it wasn't for Shane O'Neill able to score a crucial goal from the corner, who knows how that game, of course, would have turned out if it goes to extra time or even go to penalties. And after it ends scoreless in regular time, and also if they didn't show up until the last 15 minutes against Minnesota, it would have been the Loons that would made it to the MLS Cup. But obviously they once again didn't show up in MLS Cup, and again pretty much the entire squad did not show up in MLS Cup, and therefore that is probably one of the biggest reasons why things kind of went wrong for the Sounders and they did not win MLS Cup this year. The disappointment showing in the MLS's back tournament. I mean, I talked about how they kind of treated the MLS's back tournament like the first half of the season, but that being said, it is still a tournament, and You know, when you look at the group that they were, everybody thought that they were going to top the group. Like, there was no way in the world that when you have teams like the San Jose Earthquakes, Vancouver Whitecaps, and the Chicago Fire, who was still trying to figure out their team, that you should. There's no way that they don't finish at the top of the group. But yep, they got off to a relatively rough start by getting a scoreless draw against the Quakes. And anytime when you get a score, you can't score against this Quakes backline. Yeah, you know you have some issue with your team. And then they did perform well against Vancouver, and I think that game was really their best game in the MLS's back tournament, winning 3-0 in that one. But then the very next game, in that morning game against Chicago, they didn't wake up at all and lost that one to finish second in the standing. And because of the fact that they finished at that spot, they had that daunting task to take on LAFC, and they got absolutely shellacked in that round of 16 MLS back tournament game against LAFC. Now, the good news is they did get revenge against LAFC later in the playoffs, but I don't think a lot of people will forget about how bad the Sounders was in the MLS's back tournament, and probably one of the most disappointing team in the MLS's back tournament. And they only saved themselves from probably being the most disappointing team in the MLS's back tournament if it wasn't for Atlanta United decided to also not show up in the MLS's back tournament and kind of gone through a crisis that would actually led to their big demise throughout the season. And then lastly, the thing that went wrong for the Sounders is that, you know, even though this didn't happen during the season, but losing Jordan Morris got to hurt, and it's just the way that they lost Jordan Morris. Like, it's not that they lost to him during a game that the Sounders played, but they lost him when he was in his dream move to go to Swansea City and potentially start his European adventure, and then it now looks like it's been derailed because of this torn ACL, and that, you know, even if he is going to be coming back to the Sounders after this loan move is over, he is definitely in no shape of going to be playing games, and that he could potentially be out of the season. So yeah, with that being said, that will kind of bring up the big question and kind of perfectly transition to talk about the moving forward part about the Sounders, is that they might need to have a temporary replacement for Jordan Morris heading into this upcoming season. But the question is, will they do it? Because right now the Sounders has been relatively quiet during this off season, which is not unusual considering the fact that they tends to not make their biggest move during the off season, and they're always tend to make some big move either during the season or during the secondary transfer window, and yet somehow that still kind of paid off. But at the same time, I think the other reason why they're not making some big move is that they just recently lost their sporting director, Chris Henderson, to Inter Miami. And knowing the fact that I'm pretty sure Garth Lagerwey is trying very hard to try to find a new sporting director, or maybe he'll just take the role as the sporting director and try to find a replacement for Jordan Morris. Maybe that's the reason why they're not really making some big move. And I know some Sounders fan might be concerned that with the lack of off-season signing, that, you know, with how also other team around the West have improved, how are they going to kind of improve heading into this upcoming season? Like I said, I will never question in terms of how the Sounders are going to do. Like, they could have a squad that might be depleted, or maybe a squad that is filled with a bit of a holes, and I'll talk about next how, you know, the depth on this team is definitely one of the big issues that they have heading into this upcoming season. But no matter what that happened, you know the Sounders are still going to finish second in the Western Conference, and you know that somehow they will still be a team that's going to be competing out of the West, because it's the Seattle Sounders. I don't know how they can do it, but they've proven years after years and proving everybody wrong that as soon as you put some doubt that this team could potentially falter because they have problem with their squad, next thing you know, they somehow finish second in the Western Conference and end up making an MLS Cup run heading into the season. But that being said, as I mentioned about the depth of their squad, yeah, they definitely need to have some depth signings in terms of their squad. I think especially on the defensive and attacking part of the field, where, you know, on the defensive side, the fullback position, you know, I think they're pretty good in terms of the depth chart there, but there is the question about the right back position and whether or not if Alex Rodon would be a decent kind of depth player in that fullback position. Then you got the center back situation where they currently have free center back in their center back depth chart, and having free center back in your center back depth chart isn't really the worst thing in the world, but knowing the fact that we are coming into this season and we look like we're probably going to have to deal with something called the COVID-19 pandemic, you definitely want to make sure you are too deep in your center back position. And that what if you potentially have an injury in terms to one of your center back, or God forbid one of your center back might have got COVID-19 and he won't be available in some of those games. That's why you need to boost your depth and make sure you have kind of a next man up kind of player that could step into that center back role. And then you look at also on the attacking end, they still haven't really find a potential backup for Nico Lodeiro. And as I mentioned, if Lodeiro is unable to play with this team, then I think that is really kind of the only thing I can maybe think about how the Sounders could potentially falter and potentially be a team that might not actually be competing for MLS Cup. But as long as he's there, there's no doubt that this team has continued to be a decent team. But that being said, if he's not going to be there, who's going to be the backup for him? And that's the big question that the Sounders still have not been able to figure out heading into this off season. And then also, most importantly, the winger position. We know Jordan Morris is not going to be available in that spot, so you do have a gap in terms of that position. And also, when I look at some of the replacement and some of the players on the winger spot depth chart, most of those guys are young players or kids that is coming out of the Sounders Academy or even coming out of their USL affiliates, Tacoma Defiance. And I don't know if they're going to really trust those guys as the players that you expect to continue to produce goals. But we'll see whether or not if that, of course, is going to be the case, or they might look somewhere to booster some depth in terms of the winger position. But overall, they definitely need depth if they want to once again make another MLS Cup run heading into this upcoming season and potentially reach MLS Cup again. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for my moving forward series about the Seattle Sounders. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? If you're a Sounders fan, what went right, what went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, how your team is going to look heading into this upcoming season. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.